What was more difficult to win, the Premier League or the Champions League? You're the deciding vote.
Well, I am a master winning the Premier League.
If there's one team that could stop Arsenal, yeah, I would pick Man City.
Something strange is happening at Manchester City. Pep Guardiola, the man who built his entire legacy on control, structure, and obsessive positional discipline, has just thrown out the rule book. The same manager who used to divide the pitch into a perfect grid, who demanded that no more than 3 players occupy the same horizontal line, who made his teams pass teams to death with 70% possession, has decided that maybe, just maybe, chaos works better. Last season was torture for City. A third-place finish felt like a crisis. They lost to Bournemouth. They collapsed against Feyenoord after being 3 goals up with 15 minutes to go. They got embarrassed by Tottenham 4-0. Pep was scratching his head so much it looked like he was trying to dig through his skull.
With my finger here, with my nail.
But this season, City are back, and they're back in a way nobody expected. They beat Liverpool 3-0 at Anfield with a performance so fluid, so unpredictable that even Jurgen Klopp would have struggled to figure it out. Jeremy Doku, a traditional winger on paper, spent half the match playing like a number 10, drifting inside, pulling Liverpool's midfield apart and putting up numbers we haven't seen since Eden Hazard in 2019. 9 dribbles attempted, 8 completed. Phil Foden, who looked completely lost last season, is back to his Player of the Year form. Erling Haaland is scoring for fun again. And somehow, Pep has turned Matheus Nunes into a reliable right back. But here's what makes this version of City so dangerous. They're not trying to dominate possession anymore. They're not obsessed with perfect positional structure. They're letting teams have the ball, then hitting them on the counter with speed and precision that feels almost un-Guardiola. Wingers are tucking inside, midfielders are crowding centrally, players are breaking every positional rule Pep used to preach, and it's working terrifyingly well. So the question isn't whether City are back. The question is whether the Premier League is ready for this new version of Pep, because if last season was about survival, this season is about revenge. And trust me, you don't want to be on the wrong side of a motivated Pep Guardiola. This is why Pep's new tactics are the most dangerous thing in football right now. To understand why this new Pep Guardiola is so dangerous, you need to understand what he went through last season, because what we're seeing now isn't just a tactical tweak. It's a response to the most painful year of his Manchester City career. The 2024-25 season was supposed to be another victory lap. Instead, it became a nightmare, as City finished 3rd. For a club that had won 6 Premier League titles in 7 years, finishing 3rd felt like a disaster. But it wasn't just where they finished, it was how they got there. The losses were humiliating. Tottenham beat them 4-0 at the Etihad, 4-0 at home. Bournemouth, a team City would usually brush aside without thinking, got a win. Brighton beat them. Feyenoord were losing 3-0 with 15 minutes to go in the Champions League, and somehow City let them back into the game to draw 3-3. Pep described it himself as a season of survival, not dominance, not excellence. Survival. For a man who had built his reputation on making football look like art, this was torture, and you could see it on his face. The scratches on his head became a meme. He looked exhausted, frustrated, like a man who couldn't figure out why his machine had stopped working. The injuries didn't help. Losing Rodri was massive. The guy won the Ballon d'Or, and City lost all 3 games he missed in 2024. He wasn't just important, he was irreplaceable. There was nobody else who could play as the sole pivot, nobody who could defend like him and score like him. Erling Haaland had recurring ankle problems that kept him out for chunks of the season. Without Julian Alvarez, who had left for Atletico Madrid, City had no backup striker. Kevin De Bruyne, the ginger maestro who had casually dropped 18 assists when he returned from injury the season before, was out for even longer periods. The duo that had powered City to the treble in 2023 were barely available, and when they were available, they weren't the same. But the real problem went deeper than injuries. The players who had been pillars of consistency for years suddenly looked old. Ilkay Gundogan, who had returned to City like a hero, couldn't cope with the pace of the Premier League anymore. Bernardo Silva, usually so reliable, had a massive dip in form. Pep kept playing them because of the trust built over years of success, but it showed a reluctance to move on. He was holding on to the past while the present was crumbling. And then there was Phil Foden, the 2024 Premier League Player of the Year. The guy who had scored clutch goal after clutch goal, who had dragged City through difficult patches when De Bruyne was out, who had destroyed Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. That Phil Foden vanished completely. He went from being one of the best players in the world to looking like a shadow of himself. There was a brief spell in the new year where he scored in 4 consecutive games, but aside from that, nothing. No spark, no confidence, no impact. It was one of the biggest individual drop-offs you could imagine. Pep tried everything, different formations, different personnel, different tactics, but nothing worked. City were stuck in this cycle where they'd play well for 60 minutes, then collapse, or they'd dominate possession but create nothing, or they'd concede soft goals and have no answer. Teams that used to fear City could smell blood. They knew this version of Pep's team was beatable, and they attacked with confidence. For the first time in years, Manchester City looked vulnerable. Not just beatable, vulnerable. By the end of the season, City were fighting just to secure Champions League football. They made it, finishing third, but it felt hollow. This wasn't the standard. This wasn't what Pep Guardiola had built his reputation on. And for most managers, a third place finish and a cup final would be considered a good season. But for Pep, those are the standards when you're the greatest manager of all time. A bad season for him is what most clubs dream about. But here's the thing, Pep didn't panic. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame the injuries or the schedule or bad luck. Instead, he said something that seemed crazy at the time, but makes perfect sense now. He said the losses were necessary, that the team needed to go through pain to remember what hunger felt like. Because when you keep winning and winning and winning, you can lose your desire. You start playing on autopilot. You stop being desperate. Pep knew that, and he knew that to come back stronger, City needed to remember what it felt like to lose. So he adapted, he changed, he evolved, because that's what great managers do. They don't fight change, they embrace it. And what Pep came back with this season is something nobody expected. Not a rebuild, not a minor adjustment, a complete tactical revolution. The rules that had defined his teams for over a decade, gone. The obsession with possession and positional perfection, abandoned. The strict structure that made his football predictable in its brilliance, replaced with something fluid, chaotic, and far more dangerous. Last season was hell, but it was necessary hell, because what came out on the other side is a version of Pep Guardiola that the Premier League has never seen before, and that should terrify everyone. For over a decade, Pep Guardiola has been football's ultimate control freak. Everything had to be perfect. Every player had to know exactly where to stand, where to move, and when. His teams didn't just dominate possession, they suffocated opponents with it. 70% possession wasn't a luxury, it was the standard. But this season, something fundamental has changed. Pep Guardiola has decided that maybe, just maybe, perfection is overrated. To understand how radical this shift is, you need to understand what Pep's football used to look like. He would divide the pitch into 6 horizontal rows and 5 vertical columns, creating a perfect grid. Then he'd make sure no more than 3 players occupied the same row and no more than 2 players stood in the same column. This wasn't just a guideline, it was law. It's why his teams always looked so fluid but never lost their structure. It's why he used to say formations don't really matter. Whether City played 4-3-3 or 3-2-4-1, the rules stayed the same. His players knew exactly where not to stand. The system was beautiful, organized, and devastatingly effective, but it was also predictable. Teams knew what City would do. They'd build from the back with a back 3. A fullback would invert into midfield. The ball would circulate patiently until a gap appeared. Then boom, they'd strike. It worked for years because City's players were so technically perfect that even when teams knew what was coming, they couldn't stop it. But last season exposed a problem. When the technical execution dropped, when players like Foden and Gundogan weren't at their best, when the passing wasn't crisp enough, the system fell apart. City became predictable without being unstoppable, and that's when Pep realized he needed to evolve. This season, if you watch City carefully, those old rules have been thrown out the window. Against Bournemouth, City had 3 or 4 players packed tightly together in the middle of the pitch. Not spread out, not maintaining perfect spacing, crowded. The idea was simple. Pull defenders out of position by overloading one area, then exploit the space left behind. For Haaland's first goal, City's entire front 6 were bunched together centrally. Nico Gonzalez chipped it forward. Ryan Cherky headed it down. Haaland exploded up front and delivered a brilliant finish. No elaborate build-up, no 30-pass sequence. Just quick, direct, efficient. The second goal was almost identical. Everyone crowded the center. A few slick passes. Haaland threw on goal. Done. Now you might say, Pep's teams have always played close together for quick, short passes. But here's the difference. One of the players drifting inside was Jeremy Doku. On paper, Doku is City's most traditional winger. player. Fast, skillful, loves to dribble, thrives in one-on-one situations. But in this new system, Pep uses him like a hybrid, part winger, part attacking midfielder. Against Liverpool, Doku spent large parts of the game around the center circle, occupying spaces you'd expect to see from a number 10, and it confused the hell out of Liverpool's midfield. They didn't know whether to press him or hold their position. One moment he'd be centrally dragging a midfielder out of position. The next he'd drift wide and burn past the fullback. He wasn't just moving inside occasionally. He was going everywhere. Sometimes diagonal runs into the box, sometimes hugging the touchline, sometimes dropping deep to receive. That unpredictability created chaos, and chaos, it turns out, is exactly what Pep wanted. The stats from that Liverpool game tell the story. Doku attempted 9 dribbles and completed 8. He became the first Premier League player since Eden Hazard in 2019 to score a goal, win 10+ duels, complete 7+ dribbles, create 3+ chances, and register 3+ shots on target all in one match. Basically, he did everything. Even his goal showed how much freedom he has now. Instead of staying wide like a traditional winger, he drifted inside, received a pass from Nico O'Reilly, and curled a beautiful finish into the net. When Pep substituted him near the end, it was so the Anfield crowd, yes, the Anfield crowd, could give him the applause he deserved. After the match, someone asked Pep about Doku's positioning. His response? "I'm a genius, my friend." He was joking, obviously, but the smile on his face said everything. Pep knew he'd cracked something. He'd found a way to make his football unpredictable again without losing its effectiveness. And Doku's just one example. The entire system has changed. City no longer build with their usual back 3 and an inverted fullback. Against Liverpool, they used a back 2 for large parts of the game. Donnarumma would play long balls, bypassing Liverpool's press entirely. Then City would have 5 players in midfield, ready to win the second ball and attack quickly. Nico Gonzalez, the 23-year-old who's become Rodri's regen, would drop into the backline temporarily to create a numerical advantage when Liverpool pressed high. But it wasn't a permanent structure. It was fluid, adaptable, reactive. When the ball went wide to one of City's center backs, Liverpool's wingers would press narrow as part of their 4-2-4 shape, but City's fullbacks, Nico O'Reilly and Matheus Nunes, stayed deep and wide. When they received the ball, Liverpool's fullbacks had to push up to press them, which created massive space out wide for players like Doku or Cherki to exploit. And through the center, City had up to 5 midfielders ready to overload Liverpool's double pivot of Gravenberch and Mac Allister. The result? Liverpool's front 4 had to work overtime to prevent that first pass into midfield, because once City broke through that first line of pressure, it was chaos. In one sequence, City's back 2 played the ball wide to a center back. Liverpool's Mohamed Salah pressed narrow. Nico Gonzalez moved back into midfield, making it 5. Doku started central but then drifted wide. Gravenberch was drawn towards him. O'Reilly made a run up the pitch, and just like that, City had walked into the final third with minimal effort. Liverpool couldn't cope. Another time, City found Doku in midfield. Gravenberch had to confront him. Phil Foden became free between the lines. But because Salah was narrow as part of Liverpool's press, O'Reilly was free down the right. One pass later, City were in a dangerous crossing position again. And this happened repeatedly. City would circulate the ball calmly, drawing Liverpool's press. Then one quick pass, one rotation, one moment of chaos, and they were through. The fluidity made them impossible to mark. At one point, O'Reilly and Doku were rotating positions constantly. O'Reilly would move inside. Doku would drift wide to receive the ball in isolation against Connor Bradley. Liverpool tried to adjust. Gravenberch had to move wide to help Bradley, but that left the center even more exposed. And with City's massive central overload, that was exactly what Pep wanted. Pep has always said his tactics depend on the players he has. I want to be clear, I have some principles and fundamentals that don't change much, but I adapt to the players I have. This season, he's adapted by giving players freedom. Doku can roam. Foden can drop deep or push high. Haaland can stay central or drift wide. There are still principles: organization, quick passing, intelligent movement, but the rigid structure is gone. And it's working. City's midfield passing combinations have been incredible. They're cutting through defensive lines with quick, clever passes that happen so fast defenders can't react, because now you can't predict what City will do. You can't set up to stop their usual patterns. You can't rely on them following their structure. They might pack the middle. They might stretch cut you wide, they might play long, they might play short, and by the time you figure it out, Haaland's already scored, Doku's already beaten 3 players, and Foden's running at your defense with no one tracking him. The genius didn't just adapt, he revolutionized his own philosophy, and the scary part, he's only just getting started. Phil Foden looked finished, genuinely finished. The 2024 Premier League Player of the Year had gone from untouchable to invisible. Last season, he played like a shell of himself. Heavy touches, poor decisions, no confidence. It was painful to watch. But this season, he's back. And when Phil Foden is firing, Manchester City become a different animal. You can see it in his eyes again. That spark, that hunger. Against Liverpool, he was everywhere, dropping deep to collect the ball, making runs between the lines, creating space for others. He's not just playing well, he's playing with joy again. And Pep knows it. When asked how close Foden is to his best form, Pep's answer was simple. I would say he's already there. There's no need to be closer. He's already there. That's not just a vote of confidence. That's a statement. Foden's resurrection has been crucial because he's the player who makes everything click. When he's on form, City's midfield combinations flow. When he finds pockets of space, defenses panic. When he's confident, everyone around him plays better. Then there's Erling Haaland, the Norwegian robot who seemed to malfunction last season is back to doing what he does best, scoring a lot. His movement is sharper, his finishing is clinical, and with this new system creating more space in behind, he's feasting. Against Bournemouth, 2 goals. The pattern is clear. Give Haaland space, give him service, and he'll punish you. But what's made City truly dangerous isn't just the return of their stars, it's the emergence of new ones. Nico Gonzalez has stepped into the impossible role of replacing Rodri and somehow made it look manageable. He's not Rodri yet, nobody is. But at just 23 years old, he's showing the intelligence, the positioning, the presence that made Rodri irreplaceable. He wins duels, he reads the game, he keeps City's midfield ticking. Pep described him as having the feeling for the game. That's high praise from a manager who doesn't give compliments lightly. Then there's Nico O'Reilly, a young talent who fits this new system perfectly. He can play fullback, push into midfield, make runs in behind. His versatility gives Pep options. Against Liverpool, his movement created chaos down the right side. And somehow, Matheus Nunes, who many wrote off as a failed transfer, has reinvented himself as a competent right back. The squad has been rejuvenated. No more relying on aging legs. No more hoping Rodri, Bernardo can carry them through. This is a younger, faster, hungrier City, and they're playing with a freedom that makes them unpredictable. The midfield overloads are suffocating opponents. The quick passing combinations are slicing through defensive lines. The movement is constant, chaotic, impossible to track. Against Arsenal, City used the same approach. Crowd the center, pull defenders out of position, switch play quickly, exploit the space. It worked. Against Liverpool, it worked even better. 3-0, dominant, controlled, but not in the old Pep way. This wasn't death by 1,000 passes. This was surgical, efficient, ruthless. City aren't trying to dominate possession anymore. They're not obsessed with having 70% of the ball. They're happy to let you have it, then hit you on the break with speed and precision that feels almost un-Guardiola. They're playing faster, more direct, and it's terrifying because the one thing that made City beatable in the past was that you knew what they'd do. You could set up defensively, stay compact, hope they had an off day with their passing, but now you don't know what's coming. The King spent a season in exile, but exile is over. Manchester City are back, and the Premier League should be absolutely terrified of what's coming next. This is why Pep Guardiola's new tactics are the most dangerous thing in football right now.